That's my boy.
What's your phone?
Hi. Hello. Hi. Hello. First ever Denver Comic-Con.
Yeah.
I have been to a lot of first Comic-Cons. I have never been to a first Comic-Con like this. The energy level is so freaking high. I can't believe the attendance figures that I'm hearing for a first-time con. It's totally incredible. And what I love most of all walking around, families. There are so many families walking around here. It's great. It's great to see kids at a Comic-Con. I was the kid who showed up at the world's first Comic-Con ever held. It was 1964, New York City in a Fleabag hotel down near the Bowery. There were 200 of us that showed up for the first ever Comic-Con. And what do you do at a comic book convention when there's never been one before? Well, we batted around some ideas and we came up with some good stuff. Hey, how about panels? We can actually talk about comic books in panels. Well, what about, gee, nobody's ever done a comic book auction. We could do an auction. We could show movies and cartoons and the old serials at night. And then somebody came up with the harebrained idea, what if we all got dressed up in a costume and had a costume parade? Well, I'll tell you, now I go to San Diego, 135,000 people that they sell out 6 months in advance. New York will probably hit 125,000 this year. Chicago broke 100,000. Comic-Cons are cropping up all over the world. And wherever I go to any of the big conventions like San Diego, New York, I still see this one guy all the time. I don't know his name. He's somewhere close to about 400 pounds, big heavy beard, and he always comes dressed as Princess Leia. not this Princess Leia, this Princess Leia. And I go, what have we done? All right, so I'm the fanboy, geeky kid who loved comic books. My mom said I learned to read from comics before I was 4 years old. And I collected them. By the time I graduated high school, I had over 30,000 comic books dating back to 1936. When we moved into our house in 6th grade, my dad never once could get his car into the garage. So what he did was he built for me 3 walls, floor to ceiling of shelves to house my collection. And when I ran out of room, we just filled up the floor of the garage. That was my whole upbringing as the ultimate comic book geek. And I love Batman. Batman, I'm sorry Superman, I'm sorry Spider-Man, I'm sorry Hulk. I collected everything, but nobody compared to Batman.
That's right.
Why? Because
Human.
number one, he had no superpowers.
Exactly.
And at age 8, I could so identify with this guy. I swear to you, I believed in my heart of hearts that if I worked out really hard, and if I studied really hard, and if my dad bought me a cool car, I could be this guy. And Batman was what I collected the most. Well, moving along, I was thrilled with Batman, thrilled with my whole comic book collection. My mom used to take me up for the Thursday tours of DC Comics. I would camp out, literally camp out in 7th, 8th grade in the outer office of Marvel Comics. I didn't know what Stan Lee looked like. I didn't know what Jack Kirby looked like. There were no pictures back then. There was no internet. We were just having the first Comic-Con right around at that time. So I would have my old copies of my Marvel Comics, and I would sit there, and any guy that walked in or out, I'd jump up and ask him to autograph my comic books. That's how I wound up with a bunch of comics signed by Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, and 4 FedEx Express guys. Which has severely impacted the value of my comics. So that was my entire upbringing. And now we jump into 8th grade. It's a cold January night in 1966. And I'm the most excited boy in America because tonight the Batman TV show is coming on the air. Well, I couldn't wait. This is going to be the first time since George Reeves and the Adventures of Superman since we've had a superhero on TV. And that night, in our basement den, that show came on, and I was simultaneously thrilled and horrified by what I was seeing on TV. I mean, I was thrilled. It was in color, and the sets were expensive. You could tell. The car was cool. but they were laughing at Batman. The whole world was laughing at Batman, and that just killed me. And so in 8th grade, the same way young Bruce Wayne made a vow over the slain carcasses of his parents, I took a vow. And I said, I am someday, somehow, going to show the world what the true Batman is. The dark, serious creature of the night stalking criminals from the shadows. Some way, someday, I will erase 3 little words from the collective consciousness of the world culture: pow, zap, and wham. So I made this vow that night. Now, my parents were safe upstairs in the kitchen, but I said this is what I was going to do. Well, what happens when you have a dream like that, and you're a blue-collar kid from Jersey? My dad was a bricklayer. My mom was a bookkeeper. I couldn't buy my way into Hollywood. I didn't know anybody in Hollywood. I had no relatives in Hollywood. How do you get there from here? How do you make your dreams come true? Well, my first opportunity to get my foot in the door came when I was in undergrad at Indiana University, and it was the early 70s. It was a time of great experimentation on college campuses, and since we have some people under 18 here, I will talk no further about that. Let me simply say that in answer to the times, the College of Arts and Sciences had begun an experimental curriculum department. The idea was if you had an idea for a college course that had never been taught anywhere, and could get the backing of a department on campus, you then had the right to appear before a panel of deans and professors and pitch your course. If they accepted it, you could teach it on campus for up to 3 hours of credit, same as any major course. And so I sat down and I created what I hoped would be the first college-accredited course on comic books. Comic books is a legitimate American art form. Come on, it's like jazz. It's a legitimate art form. Comic books is our modern-day mythology. Don't kid yourself. The ancient gods of Greece, Rome, and Egypt all still exist, except today they wear spandex and capes. And as I've said before, if you don't believe me, the Greeks called him Hermes, the Romans called him Mercury, I call him the Flash. The Greeks called him Poseidon, the Romans called him Neptune, we all call him Aquaman. Same thing. I got the folklore department at Indiana University to back me. They said, Michael, you're right. It's the same conventional stock characters, the same plots, the same motifs. Go in there, we're with you. And so with my hair down to my shoulders, with my love beads still on, in a Spider-Man t-shirt, I walked in with a package of Superman and Batman comic books and original art. I walked into this room. It was a dark mahogany room with a huge conference room table, professors around it, a dean sitting at the end. I thought I had just walked into the secret sanctum of the Justice League. As I walk in the door, the dean looks at me over these little half glasses he had perched at the end of his nose, and he says, so you're the fellow who wants to teach a course on funny books at my university? And I knew I was in deep trouble. I then begin the first pitch of my life. The dean lets me speak for about 2 to 3 minutes and then cuts me off. He says, Mr. Uslan, stop. Come on. Look, I read comic books when I was a kid. I read every issue of Superman I could get my hands on. But all these comic books are cheap, possibly lurid entertainment for children. Nothing more, nothing less. I reject your theory. You know, there are times, there are moments that are life changers, game changers. I could have picked up my funny books and turned around with my head bowed and walked out. And instead I stood my ground figuring I have nothing to lose. I said, Dean, can I ask you 2 questions? He said, ask me anything you want. I said, are you familiar with the story of Moses? And he looked at me like I was crazy and he says, yeah, so? I said, very briefly, Dean, could you just summarize the story of Moses for me? And he folded his arms and he looked at me and he said, Mr. Uslan, I don't know what game you're playing here, but I'll play this with you. He said the Hebrew people were being persecuted, their firstborn were being slain. So a Hebrew couple placed their infant son in a little wicker basket, sent him around the River Nile. There he was discovered by an Egyptian family that raised him as their own son. When he grew up and learned of his true heritage, he became a great hero to his people by, he goes, thank you, Dean, that was great. You said you read Superman comics when you were a kid. By any chance do you recall the origin of Superman? He goes, well, sure. The planet Krypton was about to blow up. A scientist and his wife placed their infant son in a little rocket ship and sent him to Earth. There he's discovered by the Kents, who raised him as their own son. When he grows up, and then he stops, stares at me for what I swear was an eternity, and says, Mr. Uslan, your course is accredited. I'm now the world's first college professor of comic books. I can't believe I pulled it off. I'm walking back to my apartment off campus. I'm on cloud 9, and then I can hear my mom's voice in my head. Michael, you can have the greatest creative ideas in the world, but if you don't market yourself, if you don't market your ideas, no one will ever know if you're creative wares. So I got to my apartment, I picked up a telephone, and I called United Press International, which at that time was as big a press syndicate as the Associated Press today. I got a reporter on the phone, and I proceeded to scream at the man. What's wrong with you? You're a reporter. You have a job to do. You're supposed to be protecting society. And he goes, calm down. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, are you kidding me? I hear there's a course on comic books being taught at Indiana. Are you telling me these people are using my money as a taxpayer in Indiana to teach our kids comic books? This is outrageous. This has got to be a communist plot to subvert the youth of America. I slammed down the phone. It took 3 days for this reporter to do his homework and find out, did IU really have a course on comic books? And if so, who was the lunatic teaching it? They came down and he interviewed me. Pictures taken. That story went out, it was a third of a page long, and it was picked up by virtually every newspaper in North America and a whole bunch in Europe. The next thing that happens is I start to get called. I'm invited on radio talk shows. I'm invited to TV talk shows. Reporters wanted to come to my class where I was going to be teaching. There was one night I had 4 reporters sitting in the front row from Family Weekly, from Parade, Playboy, and Penthouse. This appealed to everybody for some reason. NBC Nightly News came down, the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. I never taught one class that wasn't filled with television cameras and reporters. About 2 weeks go by, and my telephone rings. Is this Mike Uslan? Yeah. Hiya, Mike, this is Stan Lee from Marvel Comics in New York City. I call this my burning bush moment. Mike, everywhere I look, I'm reading about you in the newspapers and I'm seeing you on TV. What you're doing for the comic book industry is terrific. How can I help you? 2 hours later, my phone rings. Mr. Uslan, my name is Saul Harrison. I'm Vice President of DC Comics in New York. We published Superman and Wonder Woman. I said, yeah, I'm Batman, I know. He said, I've been listening to you on the radio. I've been reading about you in magazines. You seem to be a very innovative young man. We would like to fly you to New York City and discuss ways we might work together with you. Okay. Next thing I know, I'm in New York City. I'm at DC Comics. They offer me a job. I'm going to be working there summers, and then they are going to put me on retainer when I go back to college. Oh my God, the dream job. Remember what I told you earlier? When you come from nothing, how do you get there? You find any opening you can to get your foot in the door. Case in point. I'm now working at DC that summer. It's about 6 o'clock at night. I'm getting ready to head back to the Jersey Shore. And all of a sudden I hear yelling and screaming coming down the hall from Denny O'Neill's office, one of the great writers of the Silver Age and since, and also a great editor. I went in, I go, Denny, are you all right? It sounds like you're being murdered here. He goes, no, I'm not all right. He goes, I'm editor of this book, The Shadow. We've got a script due tomorrow. I don't have a script. I don't even have an idea for a shadow story. I said, I have an idea for a shadow story. He said, you do? I didn't. So what? It's about getting your foot in the door when you see it's just open a crack. He said, all right, come in here and sit down. He goes, what's your story? Oh, well, you're gonna love this. It's really great. I'm trying to think while I'm sitting there, and the clock's ticking, and my wife and I had just gotten back from a vacation in Niagara Falls. And I said, you know, all the shadow stories were set in the 1930s. Back then at Niagara Falls, guys were walking across the falls in tightrope. They were going over the falls in barrels. This is a shadow story of the shadow, just picture this, battling a bad guy on a tightrope over Niagara Falls, flashlights and searchlights are in the sky. He goes, Michael, that's a great cover, but what's the story? I said, well, I'm glad you asked me that. It's a story about smuggling. Well, what are they smuggling? Okay, well, they are smuggling drugs. Well, what's unique about that? What's the angle here? I said, well, I was saving this for the last part because this is the best. You know, back in the 30s, they were going over the falls in barrels. False bottoms in the barrels. That's where the drugs are. They're going over the Canadian side, washing up on the American side. That's how they're getting it through. He says, well, that's novel. He goes, could you have a full script on my desk by tomorrow at 6 o'clock? I said, no problem. I'm now a writer for DC Comics. So I turned in the script that next day. I got there. I had to pay off one of the secretaries. I made a deal with her. I would feed her pages all day long, and she would type it up and make corrections. I'm still paying off on that deal. And 2 weeks goes by. I'm walking down the hallway, and who's coming my way but probably the most important editor, Stanley aside, in the history of comics, a guy named Julius Schwartz. Julie began with DC back in the 1940s, and he was virtually single-handedly responsible for the Silver Age of comics. He was the architect behind the revival of the Silver Age Flash, Green Lantern, the Atom, Hawkman, Justice League, the first Earth 1 or 2 crossovers, and the list goes on and on. Julie's approaching me and goes, hey kid. Now, he was a really gruff guy. Once you got to know him, he was a marshmallow, but he was really, had a gruff exterior. So he goes, hey kid. I go, yes, Julie. He says, I read your shadow script. I said, you did? He goes, yeah. It didn't stink. I go, oh, thank you so much. Thank you. He said, how'd you like to take a shot at writing Batman? Whoa. A dream I've had since I was 8 years old to write Batman comics comes true. And I'm now going back to school in Indiana, and while everyone else is studying, I'm running back and I'm writing The Shadow, and I'm writing Beowulf, and I'm writing Batman in Detective Comics. Oh my God. And then I panicked. This dream I had since I was 8 years old has come true. I don't have a dream. I need a new dream. What's that new dream gonna be? It took me 10 minutes for the epiphany. I remembered back to that night in January 1966, and I said, okay, this is it. I am going to show the world in movies what a dark and serious Batman is. The creature of the night, all those great psychologically disturbed villains. I am going to show them what Bob Kane and Bill Finger created and what Jerry Robinson added so much to. And that became the goal. But again, how do you get there from here? Well, I can do this quickly. My senior year of college, I went every Friday to the library. I got Variety. It's the Bible magazine, weekly magazine for the movie and TV industry. I took a yellow pad and I wrote down the names of every executive I could find having anything to do with the movie business. So by the end of my senior year, I had 372 names on a list. So instead of sending my resume to Human Resources or to whom it may concern, I sent out 372 resumes to real people. And this was before computers, so I had to type out on my typewriter every single cover letter. Oh, for those of you who don't know, a typewriter was a box. It was so big. Next time you're in a museum, you really should take a look at one. You'll find it right next to the VCR. I got 2 job offers out of the 372 resumes. One from a major talent agency. Hey, come over here, join our 6-year agent training program. We will start you in the mailroom for $95 a week for the first 2 years. Then you become a secretary, then an assistant, and if things work out, you can become an agent. Meanwhile, a producer in LA said, why don't you move to LA? I'll make you a production assistant, I'll pay you $95 a week, you'll go for coffee, you'll do a lot of Xeroxing, and that's when I knew I needed Plan B. And I say to all the young people here, always have a Plan B, and a Plan C, and a Plan D if you can. I went to law school, by default. I was about to get married, and I couldn't see working in New York and living in New York with my wife for $95 a week. And I thought maybe if I went to law school and took every course I could on communications and entertainment, maybe I could get a job in the movie industry on the legal business financial side, learn how you produce and finance movies, network like mad, meet as many people as I can meet, and then when nobody was looking, get through the back window onto the creative side. And for me, Plan B worked. I got out of law school, which was painful, and went to work for United Artists when it was a major motion picture studio. The movies that they put me in charge of for the legal business and financial side were the first 3 Rocky pictures. Black Stallion, a movie, if you haven't seen it, you should, called Raging Bull. And then for 2.5 years of my life, a movie called Apocalypse Now. Every single day of which was a crisis. I could write a book, but the book's already been written. And I did that, and I approached it saying, all right, I don't want to be a lawyer, and I sure as hell don't want to be trapped the rest of my life being a lawyer and writing somebody's will or doing somebody's divorce. I will approach this as if it's graduate school. I'll do it for no more than 4 years, but at the end of 4 years, I will get out of here, and I'll either be writing and producing movies and TV and animation, or I will be delivering pizza for Domino's, but I will not be trapped into being a lawyer. Because the worst thing that could have happened to me in my life would be if I had to come here today and in front of you guys, and especially in front of my son, and say, hey, I could have been, I could have done. Sometimes you just have to make calculated risks and roll the dice. And that's what I did. After 3.5 years at UA, I went back to Saul Harrison, who is now president of DC Comics, the man who had mentored me into the comic book business. I said, Saul, I want to buy the rights to Batman. I want to make it into these dark, serious movies. Nobody's ever seen superheroes or comic book movies done really seriously and dark. He was wonderful to me. He put his arm around me. He says, Michael, for God's sake, save your money. Don't do this. Since Batman went off the air in television, he's as dead as a dodo. Nobody's interested in Batman anymore. I said, but Saul, if we do it this dark, serious way, it's going to be really revolutionary. He goes, is there any way I can talk you out of this? I said, no. He says, all right, come on in. That began a 6-month negotiation. I had to find a partner who knew how to mount productions, and I found a legend in the business. His name was Benjamin Melniker. Ben Melniker began with MGM in 1940, and he put the deals together for Dr. Zhivago, Ben-Hur, 2001: A Space Odyssey, if you've ever seen any of these movies. And on October 3rd, 1979, we purchased the rights to Batman from DC Comics. We formed Bat Film Productions. I quit my job, and with Batman in my back pocket, went out to Hollywood knowing every studio was going to line up at my doorstep. How could they not? How could they not see the sequels, the animation, the toys, the games, everything that could come with this? I was turned down by every single studio in Hollywood. I wasn't turned down. That's a misstatement. I was told repeatedly I was crazy and it was the worst idea they ever heard. Michael, you're nuts. You can't do serious comic book films. Michael, you're out of your mind. You cannot do dark superheroes. Michael, for God's sake, nobody's ever taken an old TV series and made a movie out of it. It's just not done. So my quick grand slam to make dark and serious Batman movies backfired. And from that moment, it would then take me 10 years to get the first Batman movie made, 1989's Batman, by the genius Tim Burton. 10 years of everybody telling me I was crazy, everybody telling me my work stunk, my ideas sucked, everybody. And I'll tell you something, when you hear that repeatedly for 10 years, you better look deep inside yourself and test your mettle. Am I just being stubborn? Is the whole world right and I'm wrong? Or do I really believe in this? Do I really believe in myself? It's a heck of a challenge to face. Finally, Tim Burton comes into the picture, literally, along with another genius, a dear friend of mine who's no longer with us, named Anton Furst. Anton was our production designer on the first Batman movie. Another true genius. Tim Burton has the vision. If we are going to create a first time ever comic book superhero movie that is going to be taken seriously and done in a dark manner, it's not going to be about Batman, it's got to be about Bruce Wayne. The whole thing has got to be, we've got to convince audiences to suspend their disbelief and believe in Bruce Wayne. If they believe in him, then they will believe that a guy could get dressed up as a bat without getting unintentional laughs from the audience. Part 2 of his vision. From the opening frames of the movie, we must get audiences to believe in Gotham City. It must be the third most important character in the piece, because if they don't believe in Gotham City, they will never accept a guy getting dressed up as a bat and fighting a guy like the Joker. The script comes in from Sam Hamm. There is one line describing Gotham City. Gotham City as if hell has erupted from under the earth. Anton turns to Tim and says, "What does this mean?" Tim says, "I think it means New York City had there never been planning and zoning." Anton says, "I get it." Off he goes, researches conflicting styles of architecture, comes back with the plans for Gotham City, the Batmobile, the costumes, the whole look of the picture. And I'll tell you something right now. I don't care what comic book or genre movie you have seen since 1989, you can still see Tim Burton's vision impacting it. You can still see Anton Furst's design work inspiring it. You can still hear Danny Elfman's notes somewhere in the background. It's incredible how revolutionary it was. Now, from the beginning, if you want to come by later, right after this, from 2:30 to 4:30, I'm going to be signing copies of The Boy Who Loved Batman. It's my autobiography that kind of tells this whole story. But I say this for just one reason, besides the fact it's a commercial. And that is, there's a picture I want you all to see in it. It was Memorial Day 1980. I get on a bus heading home. Empire Strikes Back is opening up, and a new horror film called The Shining. And for the first time, I see this picture of Jack Nicholson peering behind a doorway, looking totally maniacal. Have you seen that picture? It's the Here's Johnny picture. I said, "Oh my God, this is the Joker. This is the only actor who could play the Joker." And I tore the page out of the Post. As soon as I got home, I ran to my desk, I took whiteout, and I whited out Jack's face. I took a red pen and I did his lips. And then I redid his hair and I showed it to everyone why Jack Nicholson was the only actor who could play the Joker. Now, being a collector, I never threw anything out. So in my book, I actually saved it and reproduced. Nicholson's hired, I'm on cloud 9. I am so happy. 10 days later, an exec from the studio calls me, "Hey Michael, what do you think of Tim's new idea about casting Batman and Bruce Wayne?" I go, "What's that?" He goes, "Michael Keaton." I said, "Yeah, great idea. Let's have Mr. Mom play Batman." I've only been spending 8 years of my life to bring a dark and serious Batman to the screen. Let's have a comedian do it. I thought they were kidding me. When I learned it was true, I almost had a heart attack. I couldn't believe all these years, all my dreams, my hopes, my aspirations going down the drain, until the genius that is Tim Burton explained the vision to me. He said, "Michael, you agree since Nicholson was hired, we can't have some unknown actor play Batman. He'll wipe the screen with the guy." I go, "I agree." He says, "All right, let's look at our list of quote-unquote serious actors." This is 1988. Dennis Quaid, Harrison Ford, Kevin Costner. He says, "Honestly, I don't know how to show any of them getting into a bat suit without getting unintentional laughs from the audience. But with Michael Keaton, who is a great serious actor, I know I can convince the world that Bruce Wayne is a guy so obsessed, so driven to the point of being psychotic, that they will go, yeah, that guy would get dressed up in a bat costume. I believe that." They set up a screening of Clean and Sober for me, the rough cut. And I came back, I said, "I take it back, he is a great serious actor." I said, "But Tim, for God's sake, he doesn't have a square jaw." He said, Michael, going from comic books to movies, a square jaw does not a Batman make. It's about the human being behind it, and Keaton will deliver on that. And he was right. And that first picture completely revolutionized everything. It impacted the world culture, not just the world box office. 2 weeks after we broke all the box office records, I get a call from a Hollywood exec I hadn't seen in 10 years. He was one of the guys who had thrown me out of his office, telling me it was the worst idea he ever heard in his life. He says, Michael, I'm just calling to congratulate you on the success of Batman. I always said you were a visionary. The lesson: don't believe them when they tell you how bad you are and how lousy your work is. But then don't believe them when they tell you how wonderful you are and how great your work is. Just believe in yourself, believe in your work, you'll do just fine. Before I take questions and answers, a lot of answers, don't ask me for specifics about rises. What happens next in my career of note is I am lucky enough in a 36-year career to be involved in movies with not 2, but 3 geniuses. Ladies and gentlemen, Christopher Nolan is a genius. Christopher Nolan should be taught in every film school around the world. What he has accomplished is he has raised the bar for all comic book movies. When you walk out of his Dark Knight, you don't have to say, gee, that was a great comic book movie. You can finally say, that was a great film. And that is a huge, huge change. Now, he had a vision, how to restore the dignity and glory to the dark Batman. And his vision was the polar opposite, really, of Tim Burton's as far as I see it. Because what he was going to do was not create a universe of Gotham City. And it was a changed comic book world since 1988. The Joker back then, Nicholson, was the clown prince of crime. That's what he was in the comic books. It was a black and white world of good versus evil we were all in, that the comic books reflected. But what happened now? We were living in a gray world of order versus chaos. We are living in a world in which Chris wanted to show the world, convince them that if they follow the Lost Horizon tale of this traumatized boy as he tried to figure out his life and who he was and what his place was, that you can actually believe that a guy like Bruce Wayne could do this. This was possible. This Batman thing is feasible today. He had to convince you that was real, and then he had to convince you Gotham City was a real city today. So he chose to film Batman Begins and Dark Knight in Chicago. If you take 2 iconic buildings out of the Chicago skyscraper skyline, almost anywhere around the world they can't identify the city. If he had shot it in New York, the instant you saw Times Square or the Statue of Liberty or Central Park, you go, ah, it's New York City. Your suspension of disbelief is broken, you've got nothing. Number 3, he had to convince you that the Joker was real and threatening. And in what was unquestionably the performance of a lifetime, crafted by Heath Ledger with Chris, you had a convincing, terrifying, scary portrayal of the Joker who could exist in this crazy world, who could be a modern-day terrorist. Somebody, a homicidal maniac, who places no value whatsoever on human life, not man, woman, child, or his own. And then maybe his toughest challenge, Christopher Nolan had to convince the massive audiences that all of this crazy technology was real, and that you could believe that it was real. Now, how could he do that? He hired Morgan Freeman to tell you it was real. For God's sake, no pun intended, you know, whatever Morgan Freeman says is gotta be true. Why do you think he does 10,000 commercials a year? Well, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, I don't think there's anything I have to say except for everything I hoped and ever dreamed to see in a dark and serious Batman, from Tim Burton's first one to the bookends of Christopher Nolan's trilogy, has done everything I could have ever hoped and dreamed. And all I will tell you about midnight, July 19th, or July 20th, or whenever you see it, first of all, please try to see it on a real IMAX theater if you can. Did you ever see Godfather? One of the greatest movies ever made. Did you ever see Godfather 2? One of the greatest movies ever made. One of those rare cases where a sequel was at least as good as the movie that came before it. That's what I believe Christopher Nolan has done. And he deserves all the credit. He deserves all the accolades. And fasten your seatbelt for a 2-hour and 45-minute ride. So my life. I want to conclude with one thing, and if any of you read the stories I wrote for Archie Comics in which Archie got married and married Betty and Veronica, thank you, Mitt Romney. I already warned him that the villain in the next Batman movie is called Bane. When I wrote the Archie comics showing what Archie's life was going to be married to Betty and to Veronica, I used as my literary device my favorite poem of all time, and it's Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. And it really has been the guidepost for my entire life and career. And the one verse I would like to end this with is, "And I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere, ages and ages hence, two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference." Thank you all very, very much. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A, and just a reminder, if you want to talk to me in person, get a book signed downstairs in the autograph section. You'll see me down there. You can buy The Boy Who Loved Batman at the Denver Comic-Con booth. On the far end, it's got the big, tall, black thing over there. You can buy the copy of the book over there, bring it over to me, I'll personalize it or whatever you want. If you don't want to buy the book, that's fine too. If you want me to sign your arm or a DVD or a comic book, we'll do that too. Questions? Anybody?